Hello again and welcome to the Family Business Show. My name is John Broons and I have a special guest today with me, Andrew Mostyn from the Craig Mostyn Group. I'd just like to take a moment and say thank you to Tech. Tech, the Executive Connection, are sponsors of the show, and I want to thank them for their support. They have a wonderful organisation that, in my mind, is supportive of CEOs and really connects people with their businesses and teaches leadership. So thank you, Tech. Let's get on to Andrew. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Pleasure, John.
So Andrew, you have been involved with the Craig Mostyn Group for a long time. Mm-hmm. You're fourth generation family member?
I'm third generation.
Third generation?
Yep.
So the business was started by your grandfather?
That's right, in 1923, so we're 96 years old this year.
96 years old this year, wow. Can you give us a bit of feedback, or not feedback, can you give us a story about how the business started and how it has evolved to today? So a little bit of background about the business.
Yeah, look, my grandfather went off to the First World War and I guess going overseas it enlightened him as to the opportunities of trade in and out of Australia. When he returned, he was very keen, very entrepreneurial in his thinking, and so he started the business with a Mr. Craig, so that's where the name Craig Mostyn comes from. It's not one name, it's two surnames, and used to have a comma in between. That's since disappeared, as has the ownership of the Craig family. They were bought out 30, 40 years after the business started. But no, my grandfather was very keen to look at trading opportunities, and so he started with some industries that more or less don't exist anymore. They were things like wattle bark production on the east coast of Australia, the importing of tallow machinery to be able to make leather and other things. And so that's how the business started, and it's gone on for the last 96 years doing all kinds of amazing things.
So today the business has a national footprint around Australia, so we're West Coast and East Coast, and it's agricultural based, farming particularly.
Yep. No, look, it's changed a lot. It was certainly housed, head office was in Sydney for many years, and we had offices in every state of Australia, and in a number of those states we had a number of other business locations. So at one stage we may have had 20 to 24 different locations around Australia. We brought that back along a lot. Diversity is an interesting thing. Sometimes people believe that it's the most important thing to have. I think some diversity certainly is, but we've certainly narrowed the business units down considerably, and we're now predominantly in Western Australia, Victoria and Tasmania, and our head office is in Fremantle, Western Australia.
So there was a decision to move the office from Sydney back to Perth some years ago. Was that one of the challenges that you might have faced along the journey?
Yeah, it wasn't bringing it back. It was always based in Sydney, but in 2006, after a strategy session, we decided that with most of our business based in Perth and Western Australia generally, that it would make sense for us to bring everybody, all senior management, into WA, and so that meant the drive across the Nullarbor, which was great, and been here for the last 13 years. Most of our business, as I said, was operating in Western Australia. We had lobster processing up in Geraldton, a company called James Bowes, and we had our pork business, our Lindley Valley pork business. We had meat rendering operations, Talaman, which is based out of Hazelmere near the airport. We had fruit trading down south. We had a presence out at the Canning Vale markets with fruit operations under the name of HJ&F Simper, and a couple of other business units that I can't even think of. So yeah,
had as past tense. So today, what does the business entail?
Well, part of that move was to sort of restructure the business and consolidate from 17 different business units. So we had 17 managers and bottom line reporting entities, and we've now brought that back down to 3 main divisions. So our meat and livestock division encompasses our Lindley Valley pork operation, which is pork farms down in Albany, Nambalup near Mandurah, and Magumba just north of in the Gingin Shire. We've got about 90,000 pigs on the ground at any one time, and we then process through our Lindley Valley abattoir up at Wooroloo. We've also bought back into a business, V&V Walsh, which is Amelia Park lamb and beef, something we owned many years ago, and decided to diversify out of being just into pork and other proteins, so lamb and beef. And we've got our Tallement meat rendering works still out at Hazelmere, and so there are our 3 business units here in Western Australia. We've then got into abalone farming, and we've got 2 farms in Victoria, in Dented Head and Avalon, and also we've got another farm that we've just started up in Tasmania, and we've also got lobster processing in 3 different locations in Tasmania.
That's a lot of businesses covering a lot of space. How many people do you employ today?
Combined businesses, it's about 1,100, so it's a big workforce. The majority of those workers are in our 2 abattoir operations, with about 350 in each of those two establishments.
Mm-hmm. And is it centric to Australia, the market, or is there export markets, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, export's always been important to us in any of the divisions that we've been involved in the past, and our current ones. So out of our pork, about 20% gets exported to Singapore, all air freighted daily up to Singapore, so that's a very important market for us. And then with the lamb and the beef, obviously China's a growing market for those 2 products. And our seafood almost entirely goes to Hong Kong, Singapore and China, live lobster and our abalone, and that's the market for the future.
Okay. So from a family perspective now, we've got a bit of a picture of the business. When your grandfather started, and some 30 years later you bought out the Craig family, how then were the transitions happening from a family point of view?
Well, my grandfather had 3 children. My father and Dad had 2 sisters, and it's really been the Mostyn family that has worked in the business, with the other 2 families happy to take a seat on the side and watch how operations evolve. We certainly involve them twice a year in shareholder meetings, one in July and one in December, so everyone's involved, and all shareholders. But it's been the Mostyn family that's predominantly worked in the business. But that then changed 2 years ago. I'd been working for the business for 30 years, and I was the last of the Mostyns to be working, last of the family to be working in the business. I took a year off to travel around Australia, and since returning I've just gone back in as a non-executive role, not the executive role that I used to hold. So in actual fact there's really no family members working full-time in the business. At present we've got myself and a cousin who are on the board as non-exec directors, but our constitution actually demands that we have a majority of non-family non-exec directors on the board. So there's 3 non-family non-execs, and my cousin and myself now form the board.
So from a governance point of view, the family over the generations has worked and discussed how we're going to stay involved with the business, to keep contact with the business. From a point of view of the size of business, is it just family held, or is it a wider held shareholding?
No, all shareholders are descendants of my grandfather, so my father is still a majority shareholder, and then his 3 children, of which I'm one, have all got some shareholding, and the other 2 families have all got shareholding, and in fact some shares are held by the 4th generation in one of the other families. So it's progressively filtered down, 17 shareholders at the moment. And it's interesting, you talk about this was discussed along the way. I'm not sure how much was discussed back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. It wasn't quite as formal as what it is today. But certainly we started with non-family, non-exec directors back in the 60s. So my grandfather was pretty much ahead of his time in a lot of aspects, and one of the things he saw was that he had 1 son in the business and 2 daughters that weren't in the business. So from his point of view, I think he could sort of see that the future needed somebody to look after the interests of the 2 girls that weren't working in the business, and not rely solely on a family member to do that. So we've actually been ahead of our time in terms of non-family, non-exec directors on our boards ever since the 1960s.
Thank you for that. The Family Business Australia, I know you've had some involvement with. I know you've been chairman of the WA State Committee.
Yep.
How much has that played a part of your involvement with the family, and has there been any cross-flow of information? between Family Business Australia and their education sort of things, their courses, if you want to call them that, and how the family has worked?
Look, I think because we're predominantly a non-family in business sort of setup, we haven't had a lot of structure around who can and who can't work in the business. We don't have a family constitution as such. We don't have a family council. Because most of the people have worked in the business are non-family professional management, we haven't really seen the need for that. Having said that, we certainly have the 2 meetings a year to involve all of the family shareholders in those 2 meetings and make sure that they're kept fully abreast of what goes on. But we haven't sort of formalised education and so forth outside of the business. So the other 2 families have seen fit to do their own things, all gone off and got university degrees and other jobs in other areas, and have been happy to be simply shareholders.
Excellent. I think we might take a break at this stage and thank Andrew at this point, and we will come back shortly. I just want to thank our sponsors for today, and today's sponsor is Tech, the Executive Connection.